Welcome to On the Ballot with Ballotpedia, where we take a closer look at the week's top political stories. Ballotpedia connects people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. We're here to give you the facts so you can form your own opinion. I'm Victoria Rose, and thanks for being with us. Today, we'll dig into some of the biggest stories from Ballotpedia's catalog of newsletters. Joining me now is staff writer and trivia master, Paul Rader.
Hey, Victoria. Glad to be here.
Great to have you, Paul, as always. Thanks for pulling a double for us this week.
Of course, I'm always happy to do it. I'm always happy to just talk. And it fits with my master plan to slowly consume the entire show.
Well, to start with some of our other guests, we've talked about how they ended up at Ballotpedia in the first place. So I thought I should probably ask Paul this question. So would you mind sharing with our listeners how you ended up at Ballotpedia?
And how dare you not ask me before? Anyways, about me. I have lived in Florida for 99.9% of my life. I like long walks on the beach. I went to the University of South Florida for undergrad, graduated in 2015, then went to grad school at University of Florida, go Bulls and go Gators. In 2019, I became a spring 2018 intern while I was at grad school, and I work within the elections team. And now, a little over 4.5 years later, here I am still.
You give Paul a mic and he'll talk about Florida. It's about all you need to know. So today, I want to talk about the different sorts of newsletters we produce here at Ballotpedia. Every week, I highlight a different one, but I thought today we could give our listeners a rundown of the full gambit of newsletters we offer. With over 2 million email subscribers, it's a big part of how we fulfill our mission of informing voters with neutral and reliable information. Wouldn't you agree, Paul?
I most certainly would. And to channel your words, we know staying on top of political news can feel like a full-time job. So we want to help you be informed without having to put in 8-hour days on Ballotpedia. Some of you might want to, and we do have some open positions here at Ballotpedia. But for everybody else, we can deliver what you need right to your inbox.
What I like most about our newsletters is that they can really cater to what you're most interested in keeping up on. So let's break them down for our listeners.
Sounds good to me. I think the best place to start that's probably the daily and weekly brew.
Yeah, I think so too.
The difference between the two really only being how often you'd like to be updated on the political stories we're paying the most attention to. Think of the weekly brew as kind of like the greatest hits of the daily brew. It comes out every Friday, and now I'm going to be the interviewer. Any stories catch your eye before Labor Day weekend?
In fact, one did. My full-time job here at Ballotpedia is ballot measures, which are those questions at the end of your ballot, which seem intentionally written to confuse you. The Weekly Brew reported that as of August 30th, 131 statewide measures have been certified for the ballot in 37 states. For some context, that's 29 less than the average number of certified at this point in other even-numbered years from 2010 to 2020. Especially interesting is the decrease in the number of citizen-initiated measures, which voters can put on ballots by collecting signatures. For 2022, we have 27 citizen-initiated measures. The average over the last 10 years for even-numbered cycles is 56, so it's nearly half of what we usually expect. For referred measures, which are sent to the ballot by the legislature, a commission, or are automatically referred via the state constitution, we have 106 measures certified, just slightly lower than the average of 108.
And are there any ballot measures in, Florida?
You can't see this, listeners, but I'm rolling my eyes. But yes, Paul, there are, and you can find them using our sample ballot tool. Let's move on to the ballot bulletin next.
Great choice.
The ballot bulletin tracks developments in election policy at the federal, state, and local levels, and typically comes out once a month. It covers everything ballot-related, quick, easy-to-understand summaries of prominent events relating to electoral systems, redistricting, and voter provisions. Last month's edition highlighted 7 election administration bills from New Jersey and 3 from Delaware.
And taking a look at all of the activity we saw in July, Democrats sponsored 24 of the 50 bills acted on in the month, Republicans sponsored 11, bipartisan groups sponsored 9, and for the remaining 6, partisan sponsorship was not specified. We gather all this information for the bulletin using our Election Administration Legislation Tracker, say that 5 times fast, which went live at the end of June. It's a great tool to learn more about bills in your state or that you just find interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely a rabbit hole. I've gotten lost in there a few times myself. And we also did a whole episode on our election legislation tracker, so be sure to go back and listen to that one. How about Hall Pass, Paul? The school year's just started, and I bet a lot of our listeners have kids headed back to classrooms, or maybe they're students themselves. What can they get out of the Hall Pass newsletter?
Oh, there's plenty. On August 23rd, Florida's 69 school districts held school board primary elections. Oh, what a surprise. Politics brings up Florida again. The Republican and Democratic nominees for governor, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis and Democrat Charlie Crist, who was once a Republican governor of the state himself, endorsed a bunch of candidates. That's pretty unusual, but it underscores the increased attention that school boards and education policy has received around the country.
Interesting. And how did their endorsements help or hinder the candidates?
So DeSantis endorsed 30 candidates. 25 of them won outright or advanced to a runoff, which is an 83% success rate, and Crist endorsed 7 school board candidates, 5 of whom won outright or advanced to a runoff, a 71% success rate. So their endorsements had a noticeable impact.
I guess that makes a lot of sense considering how popular Governor DeSantis is with Republicans in his home state. Education is one of the areas he's also taken the most interest in.
Indeed.
What are some of our other newsletters listeners should know about, Paul?
Besides all of them, well, we got a variety of newsletters, so our readers and listeners can definitely find one they are interested in. There's the Heart of the Primaries, which is still relevant because we still have a few more statewide primaries to go in September up in the Northeast. Delaware, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. Now, if you're interested in the world of campaign finance and free speech, the Disclosure Digest is perfect for keeping up with the latest news on donor disclosure policy, pending lawsuits, and major activity by advocacy and spending groups. Or you may be interested in the intersection between business and politics that seems to be growing all the time. The Economy and Society, We Live in a Society, newsletter covers developments in corporate activism, tracks corporate political engagement, and highlights ESG trends, that's short for environmental, social, and governance.
All of those newsletters are packed with all kinds of really interesting bits of information. One of my favorites has to be Rope and Gavel. It's all about the federal courts.
Ooh, that's definitely a good one. What story caught your attention there?
For sure, it's really a useful tool to keep tabs on the Supreme Court. SCOTUS has scheduled its October sitting for the 2022-2023 term, and the court will hear arguments in 8 cases over 2 weeks. November is already scheduled as well, with 10 cases slated to be heard by the court, so it's going to be a pretty busy fall.
Ooh, I'm on the edge of my seat. Which are you most curious about?
Well, the first case up is Sackett v. Environmental Protection Agency.
And what happened in this case?
The Sackett family began a 14-year legal battle when the EPA claimed that the Clean Water Act applies to their land. Federal courts have interpreted the Clean Water Act in various ways, and the Sacketts asked the U.S. Supreme Court for clarity about the extent of the EPA's jurisdiction to regulate land under the Clean Water Act.
Interesting. I wonder how that'll play out.
Before we move on, can you give Scott Rasmussen's number of the day a quick shout out?
Sure. That's definitely a good one.
What are some of the most recent data points he's covered? Just give us a rundown of a few.
Only 23% of voters say their personal finances are getting better. 70% of voters say that inflation is very important in terms of how they will vote. And 70% of voters also agree with the statement that government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem.
Fascinating numbers. If you're interested in any of the newsletters we highlighted, click on the link in our show notes to subscribe or go to ballotpedia.org and find the email updates tab to sign up for any and all of our newsletters. After a short break, I'll bow out to let Paul, the master of trivia, dig into this week's footnote fact.
Ooh, can't wait.
Hey listeners, this is Jeff Palais here at Ballotpedia's Editor-in-Chief. One of the best ways to be an informed voter is by reviewing your ballot before heading off to the polls. And here at Ballotpedia, we've tried to make that as simple as possible with our sample ballot tool. With just a few clicks, the sample ballot tool gives you a comprehensive glimpse at what you'll be voting on. Ballotpedia includes comprehensive election information for the largest 100 cities by population, as well as statewide and federal elections across the nation. Our coverage scope for local elections continues to grow, and you can use this tool to see what elections we're covering in your area. Click on your candidates to read their biography, view past election results, read their campaign stances, or their responses to our proprietary and unique candidate survey, and more. We also provide election overviews and encyclopedic information on our 300,000 articles and growing full ballotpedia.org database. Don't head to the polls this election season without checking out Ballotpedia's sample ballot tool. You can find that at ballotpedia.org/sample ballot. Now, back to the show.
Oh ho ho, you thought you were done with me? Well, you're not. It's me, Paul Rader, coming at you with trivia fresh out of the oven. Can't you smell that trivia goodness? Smell that air. Today's topic, major partisan changes in both Congress and state governments. First up, as always, is our trivia question. As of August 12th, 2022, how many state senators identify as something other than a Republican or Democrat? I'll tell you the answer shortly. So, a few weeks ago, we talked about wave elections. As a bit of a refresher, the way we define a wave election isn't quite the same as how others define it. For us, a wave election is the top 20% of elections where the president's party lost the most seats during the last 100 years or so. We focus on 1918 onward for the sake of clarity and easier comparison. Now, first, we'll look at Congress over this time period. There were 4 waves against Republicans and 7 waves against Democrats in the U.S. House. 2 of those waves actually came against Herbert Hoover in the midst of the Great Depression. The most seats that Republicans lost in this roughly 100-year time period was 97 under Hoover in 1932, when he was defeated in his re-election bid by Franklin Roosevelt. Republicans also lost 53 seats in Hoover's first midterm in 1930. But Roosevelt himself would be on the losing end of a couple waves too. The most seats Democrats lost in the past century was 70 in Roosevelt's second midterm in 1938. Major partisanship changes are not limited to Congress, though it's more difficult to label wave elections at the state level. For one, state legislatures vary greatly in many respects, such as their size. Alaska only has 60 total legislators, while most states have more than that in just their state houses. So what would be a wave in one state legislature would not be a wave in another. Regardless, an election doesn't have to be a, quote, wave, end quote, to be considered a success for one party or the other. State legislative histories are often more colorful than that of Congress, and we can see some major partisan shifts on that front. Here's a couple examples. Getting into the patented Ballotpedia time machine, the 1930s and 40s were wild in the North Carolina State House, with both Republicans and Democrats making huge gains depending on the year. Democrats gained as many as 53 seats back in 1948, and Republicans gained as many as 75 seats in 1938. Then in 1978, Minnesota Republicans made monumental inroads in state government, enough that the year earned the nickname the Minnesota Massacre. It's rather ominous, but luckily nobody seems to have actually died. But state Republicans gained 37 seats in the state House, evening the chamber split at 67-67, and they also captured the offices of governor and both U.S. Senate seats. And that's a good segue into more recent years of state legislature partisanship. Democrats controlled most state legislatures through the 1980s, and in the late 1990s and into the 2000s, Republicans became more prominent. And then in 2010 was when Republicans took control of over half of the country's state legislative chambers, then a majority of overall state legislatures in 2012. So you can see that sometimes these partisan changes in governments are drawn out over the course of multiple elections instead of being a big change in one election. And don't forget gubernatorial seats. They're subject to major partisanship changes too. Historically, that's especially been the case in midterms, but that's both because midterms are generally unkind to the sitting president's party, and most gubernatorial elections occur in the midterms. So by our criteria, there were 6 gubernatorial waves against Republicans and 5 against Democrats. Most governor's offices lost for Republicans was 12 seats under Richard Nixon in 1970, which was his first midterm. For Democrats, it's a tie at 10 seats lost in 1920 as Woodrow Wilson was leaving office. That one was actually a presidential election. And in 1994 during Bill Clinton's first midterm. And it's all fascinating stuff, but as much as I'd like to continue giving you loads of trivia, I must wrap this segment up. So, let's revisit our trivia question from earlier, which was, as of August 12th, 2022, how many state senators identify as something other than a Republican or Democrat? And that answer is 8. 2 each in Minnesota and Vermont, and 1 each in Arkansas, New Mexico, Oregon, and Pennsylvania. I'll give you 8 points for that, because, the answer was never mind. And now that we've heard enough of my voice for the day, I'll get out of the ring and let my tag team partner Victoria finish the job.
Thanks, Paul. I'm shocked you didn't mention Florida at all in that trivia segment. Anyway, that's all for this week's episode of On the Ballot. Thanks again to Paul for tag teaming with me today. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, if you have any questions, comments, or just some love for Ballotpedia, feel free to send it to us at ontheballot@ballotpedia.org or on Twitter @Ballotpedia. I'm Victoria Rose. Thanks for listening.